When we gather in such a space, I wish for you to imagine not merely that we are speaking of abstract concepts, but that the words themselves are stirring the dust of your forgotten years, that the psyche in its depths is listening, trembling perhaps, because it knows that what is spoken is not distant, but profoundly near. The subject of the child, who becomes the parent, of the empath, who silently takes on the burden of the family's unspoken wounds, is not merely psychological theory. It is the story of countless souls who have lived behind veils of sacrifice, compelled by forces older than themselves, driven by archetypal patterns that root themselves in the very fabric of human existence. Parentification is the word we give to it. Yet this term is too clinical, too simple. What it means in lived reality is that the child, instead of dwelling in the natural chaos and wonder of childhood, becomes prematurely a guardian of order. The child, sensitive beyond words, absorbs the anxieties of the mother, the rage of the father, the fragmentation of the household, and instead of being seen, this child becomes the seer instead of being nurtured. This child becomes the silent nurturer. This is the empath in its earliest formation, not born of choice but compelled by necessity. Consider what it means when the archetype of the parent, so central to the ordering of psychic life, is transferred prematurely onto a child. The archetype of the parent is not merely a social role, it is a primordial image, a symbol of authority, protection, and sacrifice. When this archetype is forced into a young psyche, unprepared to bear its weight, the psyche bends, twists, reshapes itself. The playful child self is exiled, and in its place emerges a false maturity, a mask of control, a persona of responsibility. This is no longer simply the development of a role. It is a distortion of the natural order of psychic growth. In the dream life of such individuals, we often see symbols of houses collapsing, of children carrying heavy objects, of wounded animals. They try desperately to heal. These are not coincidences. They are the psyche's symbolic expression of a life lived in imbalance. The self, the wholeness toward which the psyche unconsciously strives, has been wounded at its root, for the self longs for a balance of opposites, to be both child and adult, to carry innocence and wisdom in equal measure, but the parentified empath is denied the innocence and must take upon themselves a burden they did not earn. And so the balance is broken. You must see that the empath in such a story is not merely a kind-hearted soul, but one who has been shaped by necessity to detect every shift of emotional weather. The empath was trained not by love freely given, but by survival. They became hyper-attuned because to sense the anger before it erupted was to avoid danger. To notice the sadness before it deepened was to prevent collapse. To intervene with silence and care was to keep the family from unraveling further. And so the empath's gift is also their wound. Their capacity to feel is magnificent, but it is rooted in the soil of self-betrayal. The archetype of the silent parent is one of the most sorrowful masks of the soul. To the outside world, such individuals appear compassionate, endlessly giving, strong beyond measure. But inwardly, there is a great famine. The child self, locked away, cries out in secret dreams. In mythology, we see this pattern reflected. Persephone, stolen into the underworld, separated from her mother Demeter, becomes the symbol of the abducted child who carries responsibility for the turning of the seasons. Or think of Atlas carrying the heavens on his shoulders, not as a privilege, but as a punishment. The empath, who was forced into parentification, becomes like Atlas, holding aloft the emotional sky of their family. While no one notices the crushing weight, yet let us not view this entirely with despair, for in every shadow lies potential. The empath, who became the silent parent, is also the one who can learn the profound work of individuation, the return of the lost child self, the reclaiming of what was sacrificed. Individuation is not merely the process of self-discovery. It is the reconciliation of what was split. It is the act of bringing back into consciousness the neglected archetypes, the forgotten energies, the abandoned parts of the psyche. The silent parent must one day put down the burden, not in rebellion, but in recognition that the burden never truly belonged to them. I have witnessed countless souls who, when finally confronting this archetypal wound, experience both terror and liberation. Terror, because to stop carrying the family's pain feels like betrayal. Liberation, because the psyche at last breathes as it was meant to. To individuate, the empath must descend into their own underworld, into the memories of being unseen, into the rage of being used, into the grief of being denied childhood. They must allow the child self to speak again, to weep, to rage, to demand, to laugh. Only then can the balance be restored. But you may ask, what becomes of the gift of empathy if it is rooted in a wound? Shall it be abandoned? No, for empathy is not false. It is real, but it has been distorted by survival. Once healed, empathy transforms from a survival mechanism into a conscious gift. No longer is it compulsive, exhausting, draining. It becomes a choice, a light freely given without annihilating the self. The healed empath learns the sacred paradox, that one cannot truly love another until one has first reclaimed love for the self. The silent parent archetype belongs also to the great myth of sacrifice. Many of you may recall the dream symbols of carrying crucifixes, of being nailed to wood, of burning candles, melting down to stubs. These are not random, they are images of a soul offering itself as fuel for others. But sacrifice, if unconscious, becomes self-destruction. Conscious sacrifice, however, becomes transformation. It is not that the empath must cease giving, it is that they must give from a place where the self is honored, where the inner child is alive, where the archetype of the parent is integrated rather than imposed. The shadow of the silent parent is resentment. So long as the wound is unrecognized, the empath will smile outwardly and seize inwardly, torn between devotion and bitterness. This contradiction corrodes the psyche. The work of individuation demands that such resentment be brought into the light, not as shame, but as truth. For the psyche heals not by denial, but by confrontation. Dreams may bring forth figures of angry children, neglected animals, broken dolls. These are emissaries of the forgotten self. To welcome them is to begin the healing. We must understand that what is called family is often not merely a social unit, but a psychic field. Within this field, archetypes play themselves out. The hero, the victim, the tyrant, the caregiver. In the dysfunctional family, these archetypes lock into a tragic dance, and the most sensitive child is often chosen unconsciously to be the reconciler, the healer, the hidden parent. It is not chosen by will, but by archetypal gravity. The empath was pulled into this orbit as surely as the moon is pulled by the earth. But in adulthood, there is a possibility to break free, to orbit one's own sun, to live by one's own light. And so the journey of the empath who was parentified is not merely personal therapy, it is a mythic journey. It is the journey of reclaiming the self. It is a descent into shadow and a resurrection into wholeness. It is the realization that to be human is to carry both the burden of the ancestors and the freedom of the individual. To heal is not to deny the past, but to transform it, to carry the wisdom forward, while refusing the chains. Pause with me for a moment and feel within yourself whether these words stir recognition. Perhaps you recall nights when you comforted a parent's tears, days when you became the peacemaker between adults, years when you felt you were the only one holding things together. This is not simply memory, it is an archetypal imprint. It remains within you, but it need not dominate you. The recognition is the beginning of freedom. We must remember. The unconscious will continue to reenact what has not been integrated. The silent parent will seek relationships where they are again the caretaker, again the one who holds everything together. They will attract partners who lean upon them, friends who drain them, communities that use their devotion until the wound is made conscious. The pattern repeats. This is the eternal law of the psyche. What is unconscious becomes fate, but what is made conscious becomes choice. And here lies the true possibility of transformation. To become aware of parentification is to step out of the spell. It is to say, I am not only the parent, I am also the child. I am not only the giver, I am also the one who deserves to receive. I am not only the empath, I am also the self who longs to be seen. This is not selfishness. It is individuation. It is the divine balance of life. You must understand that the empath, who has been shaped into the family's silent parent, carries within them not only their own personal history, but also the unresolved history of the lineage. Every family is more than individuals bound by blood. It is a psychic organism, a collective container for ancestral wounds, archetypal dramas, and unconscious patterns that have been passed down like invisible heirlooms. The parentified child, in this sense, is often the chosen vessel, unwilling, unknowing, but nevertheless fated to hold what others could not. They become the container for the family's unprocessed grief, the mirror for its unacknowledged shadows, the balm for its silent wounds. What appears on the surface as maturity, in the deeper layers, an initiation, but it is an initiation without ritual, without guidance, without recognition. In ancient cultures, initiation was marked by ceremony, by elders guiding the youth through the threshold between innocence and responsibility. But for the empath, who became the silent parent, the initiation was sudden and secretive. It took place in the dim kitchen where the mother wept, in the late-night arguments of the father and mother, in the cold silences of unresolved rage. It was in these unspoken chambers that the child crossed into the archetype of the parent without anyone declaring it, without anyone saying, "You are not meant to carry this." And so the soul carries what is not its own. This creates a distortion within the psychic structure, for the natural flow of archetypal development is interrupted. The child who was meant to encounter play, imagination, and wonder instead encounters duty, silence, and vigilance. The psyche adapts by splitting. One part of the soul becomes the caretaker, endlessly responsible, endlessly alert. The other part is locked away, exiled into the unconscious, becoming the eternal child who never had the chance to grow. This is why, in adulthood, many empaths who were parentified feel both old and young at the same time. They are ancient in their wisdom, weary in their bones, yet also immature in certain desires, fragile in their needs, childlike in their longing. This is not contradiction. It is the symptom of a psyche divided against itself. Dreams reveal this clearly. Many who lived as silent parents dream of forgotten toys, of children wandering in abandoned houses, of voices crying in locked rooms. These are not mere fragments of imagination. They are the cries of the inner child. The psyches attempt to bring back into awareness what was left behind. The unconscious does not forget, it preserves, and it waits for the conscious mind to listen. Until then, the exile remains, haunting the individual in hidden ways through inexplicable sadness, through unfulfilled longing, through compulsions to care for others, even at one's own expense. I must tell you, the greatest danger for the parentified empath is not the suffering they endured as children. The psyche can endure immense suffering and still survive. The greater danger is the unconscious compulsion to repeat that which was denied. Recognition in childhood seeks repetition in adulthood. Thus, the empath finds themselves drawn again and again into relationships where they are the silent caretaker, the unthanked giver, the one who holds the chaos together while their own needs vanish into shadow. It feels like fate, but it is psychology. It feels inevitable, but it is the unconscious calling out for resolution. What then is the path forward? It begins with recognition. To name the wound is to release it from invisibility, to see that one was made into the parent, forced into the archetype prematurely, is already to loosen the grip of unconscious repetition, but recognition alone is not enough. The empath must also allow the inner child to emerge from exile. This is not a simple task. The inner child does not return easily, for it has been buried under years of silence, covered by layers of shame, hidden behind walls of responsibility. To hear the child's voice is to allow oneself to feel again the grief, the anger, the longing. Many resist this, for they fear that to feel the child's sorrow is to collapse, to betray the identity of strength they have built. But strength built on repression is not true strength. It is rigidity. True strength comes from integration, from allowing the opposites to coexist, from reconciling the caretaker and the child within. Imagine, if you will, a great mandala. In its center lies the self, whole and complete, containing all opposites. Around it are the fragments of the psyche, the parent, the child, the shadow, the persona, the anima, the animus. Individuation is the process of drawing these fragments back toward the center, of recognizing that none must be denied, none must be exiled. The empath, who was the silent parent, must draw the child self back into this mandala. Only then can the circle of the psyche be made whole again. You may ask, how is this done? It is done through the work of conscious descent. Just as the mythic heroes journey into the underworld, so too must the empath descend into their unconscious, guided by dreams, by active imagination, by the courage to face what was forgotten. In this descent, they will encounter not only the lost child, but also the shadows that grew around it. Anger, resentment, fear of abandonment, longing for unconditional love. These must not be denied, for they are guardians of the treasure. They are the dragons that guard the gold. To slay them is not to destroy them, but to integrate them, to bring them into dialogue with the conscious self. And let me speak of empathy again. Empathy, when rooted in compulsion, drains the soul. But empathy, when integrated with the self, becomes luminous. The healed empath does not give because they fear abandonment, nor because they were conditioned to carry. They give because giving flows naturally, without self-destruction, without compulsion. They know when to give and when to withhold, when to listen and when to speak, when to hold another and when to hold themselves. This is conscious empathy. No longer the shadow of survival, but the radiance of the individuated self. The silent parent archetype also teaches us a profound lesson about the collective, for what happens in one family reflects the dynamics of society. Whole cultures produce children who must parent their elders, citizens who must carry the burden of leaders. generations who must heal the wounds of those who came before. In this way, the parentified empath is not only a personal phenomenon, but also a cultural one. To heal at the individual level is also to offer healing to the collective. When you, as the silent parent, reclaim your child self, you break a chain that may have bound generations. You refuse to pass the wound further. You stand as one who says, the cycle ends here. This is no small act. It is archetypal rebellion, sacred individuation. It is how the psyche heals itself, not only personally but transpersonally. Across time and lineage, I must warn you, though the path of healing will often feel like betrayal. To stop carrying the family's pain will feel like abandoning them. To listen to your own needs will feel like selfishness. To choose yourself will feel like sin. This is because the wound has been sanctified in your psyche. You were taught silently that your value lay in sacrifice. To undo this is to break a sacred illusion, but you must break it. For the self calls you not to servitude, but to wholeness. And what of the dreams of rebellion, the fantasies of leaving, of burning down the house of childhood, of walking away into freedom? These too are messages of the unconscious. They are not to be acted out literally, but understood symbolically. They are the psyche's way of saying, you must leave behind the prison of responsibility. You must set down the burden that never belonged to you. You must walk into a new life where you are not only parent, but also child. Not only giver, but also receiver. Not only empath, but also self. So I speak to you as if in a ritual, as if you were gathered here, not only to hear words, but to awaken. Feel within yourself the weight you have carried. Notice the exhaustion, the quiet bitterness, the endless giving. And then ask yourself, whose burden is this? Is it truly mine, or was it placed upon me before I had the chance to choose? To ask this question is to open the door. To live the answer is to walk the path of individuation. When I speak of the empath who became the silent parent, I am not only describing a psychological phenomenon, I am evoking an archetypal drama that unfolds within the depths of the human soul. The human being is not merely an individual in isolation, but a field of psychic energies woven together by the collective unconscious. In this field, the archetypes move like eternal actors on a stage, and we are both their audience and their performers. When a child is forced into the role of the parent, it is not only a personal tragedy, it is a misalignment of these archetypal forces. The mother, the father, the child, these are not simply social labels. They are ancient powers, eternal images that shape the very architecture of our psychic life. In the natural order of the psyche, the child must first be the child. It must dwell in the play of innocence, in the discovery of the world through wonder and imagination. The mother and father archetypes provide protection, nourishment, and structure. But when the archetypes are distorted, when the mother becomes the helpless child, when the father becomes the absent shadow, the balance collapses, and the most sensitive one in the system, the empathic child, feels compelled to step into the gap. This is not a conscious decision, it is an archetypal possession. The archetype of the parent takes root in the child, displacing the archetype of the child. And so the child grows old before its time, wearing the mask of responsibility, carrying burdens that do not belong to it. What emerges from this is a psychic fracture, a splitting of the soul. On one side, there is the false maturity, the silent parent who seems wise, composed, endlessly giving. On the other side, buried in the unconscious, there is the abandoned child, frozen in its longing, waiting to be held. This fracture creates a profound tension within the personality. The adult may appear strong, yet feel inexplicably fragile. They may carry wisdom, yet secretly yearn for the care they never received. They may serve others endlessly, yet harbor resentment that corrodes them from within. This is the paradox of the empathic silent parent. They are both healer and wounded, both giver and deprived, both strong and broken. In dreams, this paradox appears as double figures: a child caring for an old man, a young girl holding a baby, a small figure standing before a vast shadow. These images reveal the psyche's attempt to reconcile the opposites, to bring together the exiled child and the imposed parent. Until this reconciliation is achieved, the individual remains divided, compelled to repeat the pattern in relationships. In work, in community, they will find themselves always in the role of caretaker, always the one who listens, always the one who sacrifices, while their own needs remain unmet. The process of individuation calls us to break this spell. Individuation is not self-improvement in the superficial sense. It is the unfolding of the self, the wholeness that exists beyond the opposites. For the empath who became the silent parent, individuation means reclaiming the right to be a child. Even in adulthood, it means daring to feel again the grief of what was lost, the rage at what was imposed, the longing for what never came. To open oneself to these feelings is to descend into the underworld, to confront the shadow that has been denied. I must emphasize, the shadow here is not evil. The shadow is truth that has been repressed. The empath's shadow often contains rage, selfishness, desire for attention, longing to be cared for. These qualities are not wrong, they are human, but because they were denied in childhood, they have become distorted, buried, feared. To integrate them is to restore balance. When the empath allows themselves to feel anger without shame, to acknowledge need without guilt, to claim the right to be seen, then the shadow is transformed into power. You see, the empath's gift of sensitivity is not to be destroyed, it is to be purified. When empathy is rooted in compulsion, it enslaves. When it is rooted in wholeness, it liberates. The healed empath is not the silent parent, but the conscious adult who can care without self-annihilation. They know the boundaries between self and other. They can feel deeply without drowning. They can give without being emptied. This is empathy, aligned with the self, no longer the child's survival strategy, but the adult's conscious gift. Let us turn to mythology once more, for myths are the mirrors of the soul. Consider the figure of Chiron, the wounded healer. Chiron was struck by a wound that could not heal, and from his suffering arose his wisdom, his ability to heal others. The empath who was parentified is also a Chiron figure. Their wound of premature responsibility gives them a profound sensitivity to the suffering of others. But like Chiron, they must learn that their wound does not define them. It can be transformed. Healing does not mean erasing the wound, it means integrating it, making it a source of wisdom rather than compulsion. In many spiritual traditions, the child is seen as the image of the divine. Christ said, "Unless you become as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven." In the depths of Jungian psychology, this resonates profoundly. The child archetype represents the self in its purest form, the seed of wholeness, the image of potential. When the child is denied, the self is obscured. To reclaim the child is to reclaim the divine spark within. For the silent parent, this reclamation is essential. Without it, they live only half a life serving others, but never serving themselves, carrying burdens, but never dancing in freedom. And so I ask you, what does your inner child long for? Not in theory, but in truth. Does it long to be held, to be praised, to be seen? Does it long to laugh, to play, to create without fear? These longings are not trivial, they are sacred. To deny them is to deny the self. To honor them is to begin the path of individuation. The journey is not linear. At times, the empath will feel pulled back into the old role, compelled to carry again, to silence themselves, to sacrifice, but each time awareness arises, each time they notice the pattern and choose differently. The spell weakens. Awareness is the alchemy of the psyche. What was unconscious becomes conscious. What was fate becomes choice. The empath who reclaims their child self begins to experience life differently. Relationships shift. They no longer attract only those who need caretaking. They begin to resonate with those who can give as well as receive. Work changes. They no longer choose roles where they are endlessly drained. They discover vocations that allow them to express their own creativity. Inner life deepens. Dreams that once showed abandoned children now show reunions. Healing, integration, symbols of wholeness emerge. Circles, mandalas, golden light. These are signs that the self is awakening, that the lost child has returned home. But let me tell you, the final stage of this journey is not merely personal healing. It is the realization that the empath's path has always been archetypal, mythic, larger than themselves. They were chosen, in a sense, to carry the wound of the family, to reveal through their own life the possibility of transformation. When they heal, they do not only free themselves, they free the generations that came before and those that will come after. They break the chain of unconscious repetition. They become the conscious link in the lineage, the one who transforms pain into wisdom, compulsion into choice, wound into gift. And this is why, though the story of the parentified empath is filled with sorrow, it is also filled with hope, for in the very place of the wound lies the possibility of redemption. In the silence of the silent parent lies the potential for the voice of truth. In the exile of the child lies the seed of the divine self. To awaken to this is to discover that what seemed like a curse was also a calling. So I say to you, do not despise your wound, do not despise the years of carrying, do not despise the silence you endured, for though it was unjust, though it was painful, though it was never your choice, it can be transformed. The alchemy of the psyche takes the lead of suffering and turns it into the gold of wisdom. The empath who became the family's silent parent can become, through individuation, the conscious healer, the one who gives freely without losing themselves, the one who lives not in exile but in wholeness. As we move deeper into this exploration, I must remind you that the story of the empath who became the silent parent is not only a personal tale but also a collective parable. It is the story of how humanity has often sacrificed the vulnerable for the sake of survival, how innocence has been traded for order, how children have carried the shadows of adults. This pattern is ancient. It is inscribed in our myths, in our religions, in our history. And to speak of it here is to awaken recognition not only in your personal soul, but in the collective unconscious we all share. The empath's silent burden is, in many ways, a living crucifixion. It is the image of a soul nailed to responsibility, bleeding silently while others go about their lives unaware of the cost. But every crucifixion has the possibility of resurrection. The psyche does not bind without also offering the possibility of release. And so the path of the empath is not doomed to endless sacrifice, it is destined for transformation. The descent into shadow is also the ascent into light. The silence is also the preparation for a voice that can speak truth, but I must speak honestly. This transformation is not gentle. To take back one's life from the archetype of the silent parent is to shake the very foundations of identity. For years, perhaps decades, you may have believed that your worth lay in your giving, your endurance, your ability to carry. To put this down feels like death, and in a sense, it is the death of the false self, the persona that was constructed for survival. Individuation requires this death, for only through it can the true self emerge. Think of the phoenix, consumed by fire, reduced to ashes, and reborn. The empath's healing is like this. The fire is grief, anger, confusion, the shattering of illusions. The ashes are the emptiness that follows, the void where the old identity once stood. And the rebirth is the discovery that you are more than the silent parent, more than the empath, more than the wound. You are a self vast and luminous, containing all opposites, rooted in the depths of the collective unconscious, connected to the eternal. In the dreams of those who undertake this journey, symbols of rebirth appear, fires that cleanse rather than destroy, gardens once barren now blooming, children once lost now playing freely. These are not fantasies. They are signs of the psyche's renewal. They are the unconscious celebrating the return of balance, the restoration of the child, the awakening of the self. But there's also a paradox. When the empath heals, they often fear they will lose their empathy, their gift. They fear that by claiming their own lives, they will become cold, selfish, hardened. This fear is the echo of childhood conditioning, the voice that said, if you do not care for others, you are nothing. But it is a lie. True empathy does not vanish when the self is honored. It flourishes. It becomes deeper, clearer, freer. The healed empath gives not from compulsion but from choice, not from fear but from love. They are no longer drained, for they give only what is theirs to give, and they know when to receive. The silent parent, once healed, becomes a conscious parent, not of their family, but of their own soul. They learn to hold their inner child with tenderness, to listen to its needs, to protect its joy. They become the mother and father they never had within themselves. And from this inner parenting arises a new strength, a strength that is not rigid but fluid, not compulsive but alive. They carry themselves with dignity, not as martyrs but as whole human beings. This is the true meaning of individuation. To become whole, to integrate what was split, to reconcile the opposites. The empath who was once divided, child and parent, giver and deprived, strong and fragile, becomes a circle, a mandala, an image of the self. They embody the paradoxes without being torn apart by them. They live as both child and adult, both giver and receiver, both empath and individual. This wholeness is not perfection, but balance. It is not the absence of wounds, but the integration of them into a larger harmony. And so I tell you, if you recognize yourself in these words, do not despair. The wound you carry is also the doorway to your wholeness. The silence you endured is also the preparation for your voice. The burden you carried is also the weight that will strengthen you when it is transformed. The archetype that once enslaved you can, when made conscious, become the very path to your liberation. Take time to listen to your dreams, for they will guide you. Pay attention to the symbols that arise. Children, houses, animals, light and shadow. They are messages from the unconscious, guiding you toward integration. Practice active imagination. Allow the child self to speak, to play, to rage, do not silence it again. Give it space. Hold it with compassion. This is not regression, it is healing. It is the return of the lost pieces of your soul. In doing so, you will also find that your relationships change. You will no longer be compelled to parent everyone around you. You will no longer attract only those who take. You will begin to resonate with those who can meet you as equals, who can give as well as receive. This is the fruit of individuation. To live not in repetition but in freedom, not in compulsion but in choice. And finally, know this: your journey is not only for you. By healing, you offer healing to the collective. You become a model, an archetype yourself for those who come after. You show that it is possible to break the cycle, to reclaim the child, to honor the self. You carry not only your own liberation, but the liberation of your lineage. This is the sacred work of the soul. So I end this reflection not with an answer, but with an invitation. Look within, ask yourself, where is the child I left behind? Where is the burden I still carry? Where is the silence that has bound my voice? And dare to step into the fire of transformation. Dare to reclaim what was lost. Dare to become whole. For in the end, the empath who became the silent parent is not doomed to silence. They are called to speak, to live, to be, and in their wholeness they reveal a truth as old as humanity, that what wounds us can also awaken us, that what breaks us can also make us whole, that in the depths of the shadow lies the seed of light. This is the path of individuation. This is the gift of the wound. This is the destiny of the empath who once carried too much, to lay down the burden, to rise in wholeness, to live not as the silent parent, but as the conscious self